In every moment, you choose who you want to be and how you want to live your life. That is your ultimate power and your inescapable responsibility. You are the master of your reality. But it doesn't always feel that way, right? I mean, too often we believe our self-limiting assumptions. We believe our awfulized fears. We perpetuate our own insecurities and vanities. We listen to our inner critics. We have a hard time listening to each other, and on and on. How do we take back control, creating the lives we want for ourselves with awareness and intention? That's the question we consider in this interview series, Mastering Your Reality. We consider that question with remarkable people who clearly have a lot to teach us on the subject. Today's guest is one such person. Marissa Orr is the author of the brand new book, Lean Out, and I am immensely excited to have her with me today. Marissa, thank you so much for joining me. I think we should start with a disclaimer for our audience here that you and I go way back.
Way back to, it must be kindergarten.
Yes, Highland Oaks Elementary School in North Miami Beach, Florida.
Highland Oaks Elementary School. And as we talked about recently, not only did we go to elementary school together, we toured the country on a team for Odyssey of the Mind, coming in third place in that competition in Iowa. So I have fond memories of our elementary school days.
Yes, the World Finals, Odyssey of the Mind, Iowa, University of Iowa, I think it was at. Amazing.
Yes, and with a skit about a toilet, which we can get into another time.
Ronnie Lou, that's right. Excellent. So let's see. 3 weeks now, your book has been out. Tell me, how has it been? How are you doing? How was Pub Week? Talk to us.
There have been so many different emotions, ranging from extreme high to extreme low and everything in between. It's surreal to have a book out there in the world, and it's really exciting. I mean, the feedback I've gotten from people reaching out to me, strangers, because prior to the launch, obviously only people that I knew had read the book. So when I get notes from people all over the country just saying, like, thank you for writing this, it's just, there's no better feeling in the world. Also just anxious, awaiting more feedback and figuring out what to do next and where to take this. So it's all very exciting.
Wonderful. I'm so happy for you. So let's dive in and talk about what the this is. Can you tell us in a nutshell, please?
Sure.
What your book's about and why you wrote it.
Sure. So Lean Out, obviously, from the name, gives you an indication of its content. And really, it's a counter argument to Lean In and books of that nature. Because those kinds of books really, we're all talking about women at work. And when it comes to the gender gap, those books really point to culture and stereotypes. And as the reason there are so few female CEOs in the corporate world, for example. And their prescriptions to solve that problem really hinge on women acting more like men. And they don't, none of them come out and say that directly, but when you read the books, really that's the subtext. Whereas I believe that men and women want and need different things at work. This is what the research tells us. And instead of dismissing those women's needs and wants as a product of cultural oppression, I think we need to listen to them, embrace them, take them seriously, and figure out what is it about the corporate structure that needs to change to better meet the needs of women. And, what makes more sense? Rewiring women to meet the needs of the system, or rewiring a system to better meet
their make the system work. Wait a minute.
Exactly. And this system, when I say this system, like the corporate structure is really, it's a competitive hierarchy, a power hierarchy, and it's a zero-sum game, and it's all for power. And that structure was put in place in the industrial age when businesses first started getting to be that size. And since then, the entire fabric of our economy has changed. The entire composition of the workforce has changed, right? There were very few women in the workforce at the time. But these structures, these underlying structures that we use to organize, motivate, reward employees and have productive organizations, that has remained exactly the same. So that's partly what the book talks about. But really, it's not as sort of boring and academic as perhaps I made it sound. It's filled with stories about my time at Facebook and Google. And it's also really kind of a cultural critique of the corporate world. And the reason that,
Let's take those one at a time, because I'd love for folks to better understand how this book arises directly. I mean, it arises directly out of your personal experience.
yes.
I mean, it's both if I may say so, a brilliant academic inquiry, but it's also a very personal story.
Yes. And I think that's what's resonating with people, is that sort of intersection between very well researched, well thought out points of view, but it's told in the form of stories. And of course, that's what everybody loves to read. So it's really
Stories are the currency of humanity, is what I say.
They are. I like that. They're everything. And I actually talk about that in one of the chapters, like it's called the section called The Stories of Our Lives, and how these stories sort of dictate what we do in ways we don't even realize. But anyway, so it's based on these stories of my time at Google and Facebook. I worked at Google for 13 years and then Facebook for a year and a half. And the prologue of the book, which is also posted online on my Medium page, really tells the story of how I came to write it. And I won't go into all the details now, but I do cover it all in that prologue. And really what happened was, I've always been really passionate about helping women and gender studies and women's issues. And so when I was at Google, I was attending all the female leadership workshops and training programs. But after a while, I became really disenchanted and discouraged by them, because I felt like instead of listening to all the really valid and reasonable concerns and challenges of the women in the room, we were basically being lectured on how to act more like men. So after a while, I started to write my own perspective on the topic. And at first, I had a few women attending, but then it just organically grew. And a year after I started, I'd presented this perspective, turned into somewhat of a lecture series. And I presented it at Google, Twitter, and I had been a guest lecturer with that presentation at a couple colleges in New York. So like in the back of my mind, I had this, idea that maybe if I kept doing this for about 10 years on the side, it was a passion project, that I could turn it into something full time. But then amidst all of that, I got a call from Facebook. And it was a woman who had worked at Google before, but I hadn't worked with her. She had a good reputation. She was a very senior executive at Facebook, and she was trying to recruit me as her marketing and strategy business partner. And at the time, I was pretty happy at Google. I wasn't looking to, make a big change, but, this woman we went back and forth. We talked for about 9 months, and eventually she convinced me to join. And building on my earlier fantasy of, maybe 10 years down the road, then I thought, oh, well, this is the birthplace of Lean In. Like, right. Then my fantasy got bigger. I was like, oh, this is the place to really get attention for this series. What better place on earth than Facebook to expand the series? And then I go into the details of this story, which is kind of funny in the prologue of the book and online. But as you know, Sheryl Sandberg is from our neighborhood. I think you mentioned she was your backdoor neighbor.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
My backyard sort of backed onto her backyard when I was a kid.
Yeah. So we grew up in that. Yeah, we grew up in that small neighborhood, and she went to Highland Oaks Elementary School too, and we all went to the same high schools. But she's older than we are, so we weren't like in the same group.
I think she was my sister's year.
Yeah, she's like 10 years, about 10 years older than us. So with that connection and the fact that we both had worked at Google, she's passionate about helping women. Now we're both working at Facebook. I finally worked up the courage to reach out to her. I had thought about it over the years, but I just figured, like, what am I going to say? But now that I was starting my job at Facebook, what a perfect time to reach out. So she was speaking at our sales conference my second week on the job. And so I emailed her introducing myself and, all our common connections. And I asked if she would just have 1 minute to say hello, quick in-person introduction at the sales conference. And she was super gracious and gave me 20 minutes on her calendar before she was going to take the stage at the conference. So this was like, oh my gosh, the biggest moment for me. I was so nervous and excited. And the meeting was amazing. It didn't start out that way. And it started out very funny with like a bad handshake hug mishap, which I
Now,
explained.
the stage, was this like in a green room before she went and gave a talk or something?
It was in the green room right before she was about to take the stage in front of like 5,000 people at Facebook. So it started out pretty awkward, but she's a professional, navigated us out of the awkwardness that I had created. Basically, she went for a handshake and I didn't see it, and I basically like attacked her with like this big bear hug, and it was horrible and embarrassing. And like I say in the book, I felt like I had violated her before we even sat down to chat. But it, like I said, she's
talk about lean in, Marissa. Jeez.
Yeah. Right. I should have leaned out. That's exactly right. So the conversation was great because she made some comment about the career challenges of single mom. So I'm a single mom of 3. And once she said that, and the conversation took like, like it was real. Now I could, I don't stop being fake about how things are going on Facebook so far. So I started rambling on and about all the, challenges I've had and perseverance. And in the middle of saying all this, she goes to get her laptop and she says, listen, would you mind if I write this down? Because like what you're saying is really powerful and I want to make sure like I write it down. And she went on to transcribe everything I was saying, like a secretary would, like taking dictation. And I was like, is this really happening right now? And at the end, she closes her laptop and she says, look, I'm writing a book on resilience, which is what became option B. And she said, your story would be a great one to feature in the book. Would you mind? And I was like, absolutely. And she goes on stage and I was like, mic drop. My second week at Facebook, and like clearly Sheryl Sandberg loves me, and clearly we're going to be best friends, and we're going to write books together, and we're going to go on girls trips. So like she'll pay for them. Like I'm going to like live this awesome life. She's going to give me a one-way ticket to my lectures. All these crazy fantasies, and not to spoil the ending, but none of those actually came true. Because I'll finish up the story now. I know I'm taking a while, but when I went back to New York, the woman who had recruited me to Facebook, I guess I found out later that this was the reason, but I guess she had seen my meeting with Sheryl as my attempt at some sort of political maneuver, which is not at all how my brain doesn't even work that way. And it would never even occur to me that somebody would see it that way, even though to so many people I told the story to, they're like, obviously. And basically was like bullied into oblivion by this woman for the next year and a half. And at some point during that year, I was just resolute. I saw her on stage with Sheryl talking about female empowerment, and my blood I decided in that moment, I have to keep sharing my truth, telling my story, and telling a different side of the story to women at work. So in the end, the whole long point of this story is that experience at Facebook was truly a gift, because without it, I would never have followed my dream of writing this book and being a speaker and all of that kind of stuff.
That's wonderful. That's
yeah.
Wonderful. And so sort of looping back to where we started, the dreams. It sounds like it's been going very well. I mean, I'm so happy for you. The book is a major book. Your publisher's behind it. It's had a great launch. No fewer or no less than an individual than Michelle Obama is saying things like that lean out shit doesn't work. And so that
lean in shit.
Yes, exactly.
Still trying to get her to say that lean out is the shit. I think that exactly. That would be an amazing endorsement.
Yeah. Hey, it's close enough. You can quote it that way.
Yeah. Honestly, things are going great, but I think this might sound corny, but to me, having written the book was the biggest feeling of accomplishment, more so than anything, because here it's what people think of it. It's who reads it and what they say. And of course, I wrote this so that women feel heard and understood, because I think for so long this conversation has been dominated by a handful of women, and very elite and powerful women. Naturally, they're going to see the issues through a similar perspective. And it's not that that perspective is not valid at all. Everybody, you know,
bias that those who have quote unquote succeeded are the
right.
quote unquote experts, then you're by definition confined to the same system that produced the quote unquote winners.
Exactly. And one of the
Change it.
yeah, exactly. And one of the analogies I make in the book is like, let's say you're trying to solve teen pregnancy, right? Would you seek the thoughts and opinions and feedback and histories of women who avoided such a fate? Like the ones who were successful in delaying pregnancy and having nuclear families? Or would you talk to the people who did get pregnant? And so the analogy is, we don't talk to the people who have failed to break the glass ceiling.
Right.
We only talk to the people that are on the other side, or they're the only ones who have the voices. So the public,
who by definition are not necessarily so convinced that it's the system itself that prevents equitable capture of people's skills and opportunities, because that wasn't their experience. They're the outliers.
well, it worked for them, right? To your point,
Right.
like, so to them and their perspective, the system's working just fine. Look, they are where they are. So my whole point is that, you know, we just need more voices and more perspectives. And another thing I talk about is, you know, a big theme in the public discourse and, you know, captured and lean in extensively is this idea that women are punished for acting like leaders because of cultural expectations for women to conform to a female stereotype. So, like, an example of leanin.org's attempt to reverse that is they wanted to ban the word bossy, because according to that philosophy, you know, when women are aggressive or pushy, they get called bossy, and men aren't sort of subjected to that label. So
women are bossy.
Right. So over time, women mute their ambition, and that's an explanation for why there are so few female CEOs. My whole point in the book is, as a woman who, by my nature, I believe, conforms more to that female stereotype, where I'd say my dominant characteristics are more nurturing, communal, you know, those are it's far worse for a woman's career in the corporate world to conform to the stereotype than it is for a woman to defy it, because the ones who were getting promoted were the bossy ones. It was the ones like me who were more sort of not, quote unquote, nice and likable and nurturing. We were the ones that weren't getting promoted. So I pose the point or question of, you know, why is it okay to discriminate against women who conform to a stereotype, but it's a national crisis when, you know, women who violate it are sort of called bossy? So, you know, it just takes the total reverse perspective. And it also shows that research is pretty conclusive on the fact that the more agreeable you are, so the more you're likable and, you know, nice, and a lot of that is comprised of a female stereotype, the less likely you are to advance up the ladder. And that's true for men and women. So it's not really about gender at all underneath it. It's about what behaviors and traits are helpful in winning that particular game in that particular context. And research is pretty definitive in showing there's a cluster of behavior and traits that predict whether somebody will rise to the top. And it's true regardless of gender. So it just offers kind of that totally different way to look at things and a new way to understand what's going on in that world.
It's funny you mentioned Plan B earlier, because I had the privilege of interviewing Adam Grant for this series. And we talked exactly about this idea. It's almost like that whole, what is it? I wouldn't want to be a member. I wouldn't want to join any club that would have me as a member, or something like that. It's this awkward thing where you say, well, wait a minute, if the system, this just I think goes beyond the issue of gender equality, just even sort of more generally. If you have a system that's rewarding people that have traits you don't necessarily think are the optimal traits to generate the type of leadership you want, it's a problem with the system.
Right, exactly. And actually, I wrote an article based on a tweet that he sent earlier this week. He was talking about, you know, what true leadership is. And I agreed wholeheartedly with everything he wrote in the tweet. Then I wrote an article, though, saying, I agree. These are the traits of leadership, right? Nurturing greatness in others and, defending the powerless. So then how come we don't see that behavior more often in the quote unquote leaders of corporate America? And if women are more nurturing by nature than men, how come we don't see more female leaders at the top of that world? And the answer is really that the traits of true leadership are not the same traits that get you up the ladder in the corporate world.
Yeah.
And this is really limited to large scale organizations, but yeah, it's a systemic problem.
There are analogs in sort of larger societies, sort of writ large, in general. It's just, I think it's an interesting time in our society and in our world in which I think there are sort of echoes of this theme sort of at all levels, even just beyond sort of the corporate context. So.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Saying I think your book is very timely.
Yeah, yes, I would like to think so too. And one of the points I make, so the point about sort of, I guess, the larger zeitgeist today is, we keep touting these traits like empathy and listening and all of these things that cluster, on the female side. We tout these things as the future of business and all that. But business, large corporations are zero-sum games where behaviors like aggression and putting your needs ahead of others are the winning behaviors. So traits like empathy and listening, we might tout them and talk about them, but they're a liability when it comes to getting ahead in that world. So just again, everything goes back to the system. You have a system that rewards traits that are the opposite of empathy, the opposite of listening. And so you can't really be serious about promoting these sort of, I hate the word soft, but these softer traits without changing the structure in which you're operating. And, that's really the point. But also one more thing I want to say is I do also talk about something with respect to, when I was at Google, you couldn't get promoted beyond my level without managing larger and larger teams. And I tried to sort of get exempted from that policy by saying, I'm not motivated by that sort of thing. Management to me is more of a punishment than a reward. I'm creative. I want to dig in, blah, blah, blah. Over time, I realized that I was never going to be exempted from that kind of policy because what I saw is a simple difference in personality. Other people in management saw as weakness. And I think that's a big theme we don't talk about, which is when women don't want to be like empire builders at work, they don't want to sort of increase the scope of their management responsibilities. It's not just women, anybody that doesn't. It's seen as a lack of ambition. And that's kind of what I'm trying to change. It's seen as weakness and a lack of ambition. And I'm trying to advance this idea and perspective that all of that stuff is a value judgment and it's not real or true, and organizations will get more out of their employees and employees will be more productive and happier if we can sort of make room for everybody's unique way of contributing or wanting to be rewarded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's true of society at large too, I would say. Marissa, what was the writing process like for you? I remember when I wrote Eyes Wide Open, I never could have quite imagined how torturous that process would be for me. But it wasn't like I just sort of sat down and it flowed. It was, some days it was a chore to get 200 words down on paper, and because the material was so personal, I felt I really relived a lot of it in the telling to get it right, and I was a mess. I wonder what was it like for you to write this book?
Excruciating is the only word that comes to mind that fully captures the process of writing this book. Yeah. Something you just said stuck out to me, which is sort of, it was personal and you were, kind of digging deep to tell some of these stories. I think for me, that was very true as well. Yeah. I think part of it was so hard because, well, first of all, just having the discipline to sit down every day to write without being in the mood I had to basically change my whole personality in order to be somebody that had that kind of discipline. I had never sort of been somebody that someone would call very disciplined and routine oriented, but I became somebody like that in the process of writing this book. There's no other way to do it than get your butt in the seat at a certain time every day and sit
Morning, right?
there. What?
You did mornings, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I've always been kind of more of a morning
Yeah, me too.
person.
Yeah, the first thing you got to start writing, and then when you're done, you're done.
You're done. It's like that Mark Twain thing about eat the frog. Something about if you got to eat a frog, do it like first thing, so it's over with. I probably butchered that quote, but anyway, you get the sentiment. So the process was partly rewiring my personality out of my own choice to become more disciplined and sit down every day in the morning for, I did like 4 chunks of half an hour because I was on a tight deadline too with the publisher. So that some days, like you said, some days the words just fell out and I felt on top of the world. That was about one out of every 59 to 100 days. And the rest were, I felt like I was squeezing blood from a stone.
Yeah.
And I would start to question, like, I'd have existential crisis. Why am I writing a book? Who do I think I am? I can't write. I have nothing to say. I can't say this. So it builds this sort of perseverance in you that is its own reward in a way. Because now that I finished that book, sometimes I feel like I can do anything because that was the hardest thing. And to your point about it being personal, like I think my ego once my ego was involved, like if I started reading it as if I'm a reader and judging, it's just became impossible. But on days where I just tried to relax and let it flow, it came much more easily. But man, it's not. It's the whole process. My hat goes off to anybody who's ever written a book about anything.
Yeah, me too. I tell people I had no idea what I was getting myself into, and it's a good thing too because
I would have never done it. And now, though, I wonder if you feel the same. It's like how they say about giving birth. Like if you remembered how hard it was when your kids were babies, you'd never have another baby. I think it's similar because lately I've started to get that bug. Like, ooh, I need to write another book. Like, are you getting that as well?
No doubt, yes.
Yeah. Do you have any idea what the topic? Are you still chewing on that, or you got something in mind?
Maybe.
That sounds like it was like something's brewing in there. I won't ask you, but for me, I'm still thinking about all the possibilities.
Oh, you better keep enjoying. You better keep enjoying all your hard work, please. It's such an exciting time.
Yeah.
I remember the joy of knowing that my book is finally on the shelves, and then I mean, it sounds cliche, but I guess cliches are cliche for a reason, right? I mean, it's an amazing thing. Suddenly, the book kind of just has a life of its own, and it's out there, and it'll do what it'll do, and whoever comes across it will come across it and read it and think what they think, and it's almost like you just got to let it go. It's out there.
Definitely, but I'll say the first week when it was out there, but I didn't have any feedback really because it takes a while for people to buy it and read it. It was like torture because I also felt like, that book is my blood, sweat, tears of my soul. It is so full of my truth and who I am that it felt like my insides were on a hanger in stores and people could come look at who I am, the guts of who I am, and judge me and like be like, it's just a very weird feeling to have like your guts out there.
Dorothy and I joke about it. You meet someone, a friend of a friend, or a parent of a classmate of one of our kids, or whatever. And there's kind of that. Sometimes there's that moment in the initial chit chat where we're like, it sounded like maybe they read my book. I don't feel like I want to tell them all sorts of stuff they already know. It's also a little awkward how much they know about my life, but anyway, I suspect, like me, you're glad to have done it and to have it out there, right?
Totally. And one of the reasons too, you mentioned your kids, like, I mean, they're too young to read it now, but just knowing that in years to come, like they can know more of who I was in a way that wasn't just their mom is amazing to me. And in Stephen King's book on writing, he says something. Yeah, I love that book. I've read it like twice.
I'm going to guess that that book was recommended to you by a mutual friend of ours.
No, I read that book.
No?
I read that book before I ever met that mutual
Excellent.
friend of ours. I read it when I was still toying with the idea of writing one.
Well,
He
you're,
writes.
you're
He
smart.
writes.
The mutual friend is Greg Ray, who's a gentleman I'll mention, sort of a partner to both of us in our journeys. But yeah, Greg's the one who recommended On Writing to me. I love that book.
I love that book too. And if you haven't read Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott,
I'm not.
it's the best book on writing. I mean, you will be in tears. It is so funny. It is so real, true. I mean, it's amazing. But the
Can't wait.
thing that Stephen King said is that uh, writing is the only form of time travel.
That's right.
And now that my book is out, that's how I totally get that, because it's like it
Well,
will live on.
I just got the chills because I remember how much that idea hit me when I never thought about it that way until I read that book.
Same
And
here.
yeah, and it's amazing that you connected to the kids thing. Yeah, I remember one of the like most important things for me was when the book was finally physically printed and we had copies was to make sure there was a copy in each of the kids' rooms. They're way too young to read it now, and one of my sons was using it as a doorstop, which was adorable.
Ah,
But like it just was this thing. Like they now each have a copy, and someday they'll be able to read it.
yeah, it's an amazing feeling. My twins asked me without any prompting if they could take my book in for show and tell in their class. It's so cute, right? Like you can't script something like that. So I agree with you.
Well, I could talk to you forever, and I'm hoping we can do this again. Maybe we'll check back in a couple months and see how everything's been going, what you're up to. But in the meantime, I will let you go and continue to enjoy your well-earned success and praise. I know it was a painful process, but I'm glad you did it. Thank you. I'm glad the world has your book, Marissa.
Thank you so much. And I always love chatting with you. So I'd love to come back anytime. And thanks for having me. This is fun.
Of course.